We are in Brussels, and we have just listened to the presentation of the 2009 report from the International Narcotics Control Board. The presentation here in Brussels was made by Mr. Raymond Yans, who is a member of the INCB board. Could you just please first, Mr. Yans, tell us briefly what is INCB?
Well, we are a very well-known UN institution among those who want to legalize drugs,
Yeah.
because they know we are the biggest problem opposing their political ambitions. Actually, we have been created after the 1961 UN Convention on drugs, and our job is to control the implementation of the UN drug control conventions, including the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, and partly for the 1988 Convention, which gives us the mandate to control the precursors, which are the chemicals necessary to make licit or illicit drugs. And our job is to check that any drug use would be done according to the convention, which means only according to medical or scientific needs. The conventions do forbid what is called now the recreative use of drugs.
Okay. Now, this report, one of the main themes of this report is prevention.
Yes.
Why did you choose that theme? I mean, every year the report has a different theme, and this
Yes.
year it is prevention.
Every year we change.
Yeah. So why is that? Why did you choose prevention this year?
We didn't really choose prevention. We choose primary prevention because we found out that primary prevention is some kind of a dinosaur in European drug policies. It's being forgotten. It's being considered as old-fashioned, as useless. What is primary prevention? It's just giving information to the families, to the teachers, to the young people, to problematic groups in society, giving them information, and good information, about the dangers of drugs, about the toxicity of banalized drugs. For example, in some countries, most people consider, because they have been influenced to consider, that cannabis is a soft drug. According to most states in the world, and according to the conventions, and according to science evidence, cannabis has been classified as a drug to be controlled because it is a real drug, because it may be a dangerous drug. It's not always, not on everybody, but it may be a very dangerous drug according to the kind of people who's going to use it, according to the quantities. So I think it was very normal for states to consider control of cannabis. And primary prevention is just giving information, cannabis is very hazardous for your lungs. It may give you cancer, just like tobacco. People need to know that information. People need to know that young people of 14 who would use cannabis may have huge problems of memory, of short-term memory, of mid-term memory, and many of them will perform in a bad way at school because of cannabis. This is primary prevention. Primary prevention is giving general information about the hazards of taking drugs, and especially about those drugs which are most common among the young people. We have other kinds of prevention, like secondary prevention or tertiary prevention, which are mostly taking care of those people who use drugs or who abuse drugs. So we consider that, of course, secondary and tertiary prevention, drug treatment for drug addicts is completely necessary. But the problem is that more and more states, especially inside Europe or in developed countries, spend most of their money given to drug control only to drug law enforcement, police control, which is also fine, and to drug treatment, to take care of drug addicts. And they forget the importance of primary prevention. So that's why we thought it would be a suitable time to draw the attention of political authorities in the world on the necessity to use more primary prevention programs, because we consider that those countries who did that, countries like Japan, countries like Sweden, who do have very good primary prevention programs, do have very good success in drug prevalence rates, which are lower than in countries who have forgotten to do that.
Now you have devoted quite a lot of space also to the cannabis issue. You have spoken in the report about so-called medical use of cannabis, and you also mention the sale of cannabis seeds. Could you elaborate a bit on the medical issue first?
Yes. So, as you well remember, the role of the conventions is to limit drug use to medical or scientific research use. So basically, it might be possible to consider some medical use of cannabis. But the problem is that that kind of medical use should be done according to the conventions. And what do the conventions say? If a state considers there is a medical use of a plant which is under control, just like opium, there are countries who cultivate opium to make medicines, to make codeine, to make morphine. France is a very famous opium grower. Not many people know that, but France and Spain do cultivate opium for medical purposes. And what is important at that time is to establish a national agency to control the cultivation of those stuff. So if your country decides to declare that there is some medical use of cannabis, the first thing is to set up a national cannabis agency, to give a license to official cannabis growers, to give a license to some doctors who are going to control the prescription of that drug, and then it can be considered that this would be done according to the conventions. That's what the conventions say. The problem is that there is no international recognition of the medical use of cannabis. You see? Just like there is no international recognition of the medical use of opium. What is recognized is that alkaloids taken from those substances can be used and can be prescribed as medicines. You have the famous morphine taken up from opium, and you have taken from cannabis the marinol. Marinol is using cannabis alkaloids, and it may help some people suffering of certain symptoms to find some benefits from the use of that medical use of cannabis alkaloid. The problem being that some absolutely not naive people in some countries try to use the cannabis issue as some kind of soft way to legalize the very use of cannabis. And the problem happening now is United States, is that some states did adopt, after referendum, the possibility to use cannabis medically without any scientific proof of the better use of cannabis plant as smoked compared to the use of extracts of cannabis, just like marinol, which can be used as medicines. And those states would just allow almost anybody to cultivate cannabis for so-called medical needs. They would take no care to control the growing of illegal cannabis plantations. And you see now so many illegal cannabis plantations in California, so-called for medical needs, which are almost not at all used for medical needs, but only for recreational needs. So we take a rather strong position towards the federal government of United States to remind them that when they ratified the 1961 convention, this ratification was valid for the whole territory of a federal state, not only for Washington, D.C., but for the whole territory, for all states of United States. And it's the same for other federal countries. Once the federal authority has ratified a convention, this one has to be applied on the whole territory. So, if United States want to legalize some kind of medical use of the cannabis plant, it has to create a federal agency of cannabis in order to control the cannabis plantations and in order to control the medical use of cannabis, which is absolutely not being done now in the United States.
Another issue that you also bring up is the cannabis seed.
Yes. Last year, during the United Nations Drug Commission, where all the states meet to make some coordination on drug control issue, they adopted unanimously a resolution calling the INCB to pay attention to the growing trade in cannabis seeds. We did so. We sent a questionnaire to all the states. We got many responses, and almost all those responses from states complaining about the wide availability of cannabis seeds of very high THC potential, genetically modified, with a THC grade reaching up to 22%, from 15 to 22%, so 4 to 6 or 7 times higher than Moroccan hashish or Colombian marijuana or Mexican marijuana. And those states complaining about that. For example, I had a mission in Japan last year. Japan is a country with a very low drug prevalence of cannabis. Very few people ever used cannabis in Japan. And in the last 2 years they complained because more and more young Japanese people through the internet could buy such seeds, could buy some sophisticated growing material in order to cultivate indoors those seeds, and were becoming drug addicts and were becoming heavily dependent on cannabis, and entered in contact with medical authorities to try to solve their dependence problems. It was quite a new thing for the Japanese, and they were mad about this. They said, how is it possible that a country would authorize such a thing? It shouldn't be possible. And actually, when you analyze the 1988 UN Convention, and that's what we do in our report, and we draw a conclusion from that, urging the countries where such internet sites are registered to take measures to forbid this, because there is an article in the 1988 Convention stating that it is forbidden to incite anybody to cultivate illicit drugs, and that such an incitement should be considered as a crime. So we asked especially, we sent those letters, we sent such letters to several states, but we should know that 3 states are mostly concerned by those internet sites. It's the Netherlands. The Netherlands also has shops where it's possible to buy cannabis seeds. United Kingdom and Canada. So we really will urge those countries to put a halt to such a wrong business.
We might get back to you on a later occasion to see now how this report will be welcomed by various strata of society all over the world. But
sure.
But we thank you for the opportunity to talking to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.